Connie Converse was born on August 3, 1924 in Laconia, New Hampshire, into a family with deep New England roots dating back to around 1630. She was raised in Concord as the middle child in a strict Baptist household. Her father, Ernest, was a Baptist minister, while her mother, Evelyn, was responsible for running a more strict household. Connie also had two brothers, one named Paul, who was 3 years older, and Philip, who was 5 years younger. The Converse home was characterized by rigid religious teachings. Dancing was forbidden and no music except religious or classical compositions was permitted. According to biographer Howard Fishman, the family environment was quite strict and puritanical, and Connie more or less resented it, eagerly awaiting the day that she could get out and live her own way. Down the line, several family members have mentioned how they believe the Converse household carried an air of mystique and held numerous family secrets. One notable example involved Connie's cousin Edie, who grew up believing her mother was actually her sister. This concealment and repression would profoundly shape Connie's worldview and her eventual break from the family's way of life. In school, Connie excelled. She attended Concord High School, where she served as class valedictorian and won 8 academic awards. Her exceptional performance earned her a full scholarship to Mount Holyoke College in Massachusetts, her mother's alma mater. She went on to accept the scholarship and enroll, but left after just 2 years. The reasons for her departure were complex. According to Fishman's biography, her best friend at the college committed a gruesome which deeply affected her. After leaving college, Converse essentially disappeared for approximately a year. Sources vary on what exactly she did throughout that time, but many believe that she traveled across the country. This time frame also marked her transformation from her strict lifestyle into someone seeking independence and expression in ways that would have horrified her family. Around 1945, she resurfaced and moved to New York City to pursue her dream of becoming a writer. She took a secretarial position at the Institute of Pacific Relations, an organization headquartered in Manhattan that specialized in relations between Pacific Rim countries. Then, during the 1950s in Greenwich Village, a neighborhood in New York, Converse began writing songs and performing them for friends with her guitar. She had played violin as a child, but since switched to guitar for her songwriting. Additionally, she also began smoking and drinking during this period. Upon learning about this, her parents reportedly rejected her music career. Eventually, her music came to the attention of Gene Deitch, an animator and amateur recording engineer who had previously made tape recordings of artists like John Lee Hooker and Pete Seeger in the 1940s. These kitchen recordings would prove to be some of the only documentation of her music. Gene was enchanted by the music and helped arrange what would be Converse's only known public performance, a brief television appearance in 1954 on The Morning Show on CBS, hosted by Walter Cronkite. Despite this national exposure and the hiring of an agent, no commercial interest materialized. In 1956, she made another set of recordings specifically for her brother Philip and his wife. This consisted of over 30 tracks she recorded herself on reel-to-reel tape, which would remain in Philip's filing cabinet for decades. By the late 1950s, Converse drifted away from songwriting as a result of consistent rejection and lack of commercial success. During the late 1960s, she shifted her attention toward academic and activist work. By the early 1970s, Converse was experiencing severe burnout. In 1963, she was given the position of managing editor for the Journal of Conflict Resolution, which had become central to her identity. At the end of 1972, it was moved to Yale after being auctioned off without her knowledge or consultation. This devastated Converse, and by 1973, she had become severely depressed. Her family and colleagues observed her deteriorating condition with alarm as she began drinking and smoking heavily. Her friends even pooled together their money to send her on a 6-month trip to England, hoping that it would improve her mood. The trip had little positive effect. She stayed less than a year and returned still a husk of herself. Her mother then convinced her to take a trip to Alaska, which Converse grudgingly accepted. Her distaste with this forced trip appeared to contribute to her decision to disappear. Around this time, doctors informed her that she needed a hysterectomy to remove a fibroid tumor. For a woman approaching 50 who had never married or had a widely known romantic relationship, this news reportedly deeply hurt Converse, as the surgery would eliminate her ability to have children. On August 10th, 1974, just 1 week after her 50th birthday, Converse packed her belongings into her Volkswagen Beetle and drove away from Ann Arbor. Before leaving, she wrote a series of handwritten letters to family and friends, all suggesting her intention to make a new life somewhere else. In these letters, she explicitly asked them not to look for her. In one of them that was titled, "To anyone who ever asks if I'm long unheard from," she wrote, "This is the thin hard sublayer under all the parting messages I'm likely to have sent. Let me go, let me be if I can, let me not be if I can't." For a number of years now, I've been the object of affectionate concern to my relatives and many friends in Ann Arbor. I've received not just financial but spiritual support from them, have made a number of efforts in this benign situation to get a new toehold on the lively world, have failed. In the months after I got back from my desperate flight to England, I began to realize that my new personal incapabilities were still stubbornly hanging in. I did fight, but they hung in. To survive it all, I expect I must drift back down through the other half of the 20th century, which I already know pretty well, to the 100th century, which I have only heard about. I might survive there quite a few years, but you understand, I have to do it with no benign umbrella. Human society fascinates me and awes me and fills me with grief and joy. I just can't find my place to plug into it. So let me go, please, and please accept my thanks for those happy times. I am in everyone's debt. In a separate letter to Philip, Converse included a check and specific instructions that he ensure her health insurance remained paid and in good standing for a certain period following her departure, but that he cease paying the policy on a certain date. This detail has led some to speculate about her intentions regarding taking her own life. Converse was expected to join the family's annual trip to a lake, but by the time her letters were delivered, she had already departed. Neither Converse nor her Volkswagen Beetle has ever been found. Several years after the disappearance, someone told Philip that they had seen an Elizabeth Converse listing in a phone book in either Kansas or Oklahoma. Philip never pursued this lead. About 10 years after she disappeared, the family hired a private investigator to learn her whereabouts or determine if she had died. According to Philip, the investigator told the family that even if he found her, quote, "It was her right to disappear and he could not bring her back." After hearing this, the family respected Converse's stated wishes and ceased actively looking for her. Philip would later say he did not know where his sister was or what he would say to her if she was ever found. However, he carefully preserved her legacy, maintaining a filing cabinet containing all her materials, including recordings, letters, diaries, writings, photographs, artwork, and poetry, all organized with a 9-page table of contents indicating where everything was located. Over the years, many sleuths and fans of Connie Converse's work have formed various theories as to what happened to her, the most prominent one being this particular possibility is also what Philip believes to be most likely. He noted that she had once defended a high school friend's decision to do the same, saying the decision to take one's own life was very personal. The fact that neither she nor her vehicle has ever been found suggests the possibility that she drove into a lake or river where both remain submerged. The specific insurance instructions in her letter to Philip could be interpreted as planning for a specific endpoint. Additionally, her final letter's phrase, "Let me be if I can, let me not be if I can't," suggests she was contemplating the possibility that she might not survive. Others believe she may have successfully created a new identity elsewhere. She had expressed a desire toward the end to work at a Woolworths, a retail chain where she could easily find a job while remaining anonymous. She was highly intelligent, well-traveled, and capable of reinventing herself, as she had done multiple times before. The potential phone book listing for Elizabeth Converse in Kansas or Oklahoma, though never verified, suggests this possibility. On another note, Converse was intensely private about her personal life. According to Jean Deitch, she would respond to personal questions with curt yes or no answers. Both Deitch and Philip Converse suggested it was possible she might have been a lesbian, though she never confirmed or denied this. Her nephew, Tim Converse, stated there is no evidence she was ever involved in a romantic relationship of any kind. This complete absence of known romantic or sexual relationships throughout her 50 years is striking and contributes to the mystery surrounding her. In an era when women faced enormous pressure to marry, Converse remained resolutely single, writing songs that explored themes of loneliness, desire, and the experience of not fitting social expectations. For several decades after her disappearance, Converse's music remained virtually unknown. The breakthrough came in January 2004 when Jean Deitch, by then 80 years old and living in Prague since 1959, was invited by New York music historian David Garland to appear on his radio show Spinning on Air. Deitch brought along his 1954 recordings and played Converse's song titled One by One. Two of Garland's listeners, Dan Zula and David Herman, were immediately captivated and inspired to track down any additional recordings. This led to the discovery of two sources, the first being Deitch's collection in Prague and the second being Philip's filing cabinet. In March 2009, Dan and David released How Sad, How Lovely, a compilation containing 17 songs by Converse. Unlike the 1960s and 70s, her music was received with immense praise. Pitchfork gave the album a 9.4 out of 10 rating. AllMusic scored it 4.5 stars out of 5, with reviewer Fred Thomas noting that, quote, Converse's lyrics are always playful, spacey, and even somewhat psychedelic. She made songs far too vulnerable and odd to be accepted in her time. The Los Angeles Times' Randall Roberts called the work strikingly intimate, poetic, self-penned folk songs, and declared, few reissues of the past decade have struck me with more continued joyous affection as How Sad, How Lovely. Today, Connie Converse is recognized as arguably the first modern singer-songwriter who created deeply personal, confessional music years ahead of her time. Music historians consider her a, quote, missing link between a now old-fashioned kind of American music and the reflective, complex, arresting music that transformed the 1960s and music forever. The Jusco ATM Phantom incident is a disturbing unsolved case that took place in Japan. On February 17, 2004, at a Jusco shopping center in Yokkaichi City, a tragic sequence of events unfolded that would result in the wrongful death of an innocent man and the escape of an unidentified woman who became known as the Phantom. The incident has become infamous in Japan not only for its tragic outcome, but also for the eerie, almost inhuman appearance of the suspect captured on surveillance footage. The victim, referred to in official reports as Mr. A or Oji-san to protect his privacy in accordance with Japanese law, was a 68-year-old retiree living in Yokkaichi City, approximately 1 kilometer from the Jusco shopping center where the incident occurred. He was described as a kind-hearted individual who had spent 40 years working for a chemical manufacturing company before retiring. After his retirement, he had been collecting a pension and supplementing his income by working part-time as a security guard. He lived with his wife, children, and grandchildren. Within his community, he was seen as an upstanding citizen, a devoted family man, and someone who would help neighbors with odd jobs and problems they were facing. On the day of the incident, the man had gone to Jusco to purchase food for his grandson's pet hamster. His hands were full of shopping bags containing various pet supplies he had just bought, and he needed to withdraw cash from the ATM to pay for additional items. His family and friends would later describe him as someone completely incapable of the crime he was accused of committing. Jusco, now rebranded as Ion, is a chain of large department stores popular throughout Japan. These massive shopping centers contain everything from grocery stores and clothing retailers to restaurants and various other amenities. They are designed to be one-stop shopping destinations where customers can spend hours browsing, eating, and taking care of all their shopping needs. A key feature of these stores is the ATM Corner, a dedicated area with multiple automated teller machines where shoppers can conveniently withdraw cash. In 2004, when this incident occurred, Japan was still very much a cash-based society, and ATMs in shopping centers were heavily utilized. The corner at the Yokkaichi Juice Co. was located inside the main shopping area, but in a somewhat secluded section. This placement made it a vulnerable spot for criminal activity, as it was busy enough that people wouldn't necessarily notice someone loitering, but isolated enough that a quick theft attempt might go unnoticed. Surveillance footage would later reveal that the woman who became known as the Phantom arrived at the ATM corner approximately 5 minutes before the elderly man appeared. She positioned herself in a corner near the machines, standing motionless with her back against the wall, her head down, appearing to be waiting or watching. The woman had an infant estimated to be between 1 and 3 years old strapped to her chest. Throughout these 5 minutes, the woman made no attempt to use the ATMs herself. She simply stood there waiting. As some time passed, the elderly man was seen approaching one of the machines and successfully withdrew cash from his account using his bank card. As the man turned to leave the ATM corner, the woman suddenly began to move. She lifted her head and walked directly toward him, deliberately bumping into his shoulder in what appeared to be a staged accidental collision. As she made contact with him, she ran her hands over his body, searching for his wallet and the cash he had just withdrawn. The man immediately realized what was happening and grabbed his wallet at the exact moment the woman's hand reached it. A struggle ensued as both held onto the wallet. The woman desperately tried to pry it from the elderly man's grasp, but despite his age, he held firm. Realizing she could not physically overpower him and steal his wallet, the woman changed tactics. She grabbed the man's arm and collar and began screaming "thief." The woman's screams immediately drew the attention of shoppers and store employees. 3 men from the crowd rushed to the scene. When they arrived and saw a man grappling with a screaming young woman with a child, they instantly assumed that the man was the initiator in the situation. Without asking questions or attempting to understand what was actually happening, the 3 men immediately grabbed the elderly man and wrestled him to the ground. They pinned him down and attempted to pry the wallet from his hands to give it to the woman. The elderly man desperately tried to explain that he was innocent, that the woman had tried to rob him, that the wallet was his. He pleaded with them to listen, to check his identification, to look at the situation more carefully, but his pleas fell on deaf ears. The man clutched his wallet with such desperate force that 3 of his plastic bank cards snapped and broke in his hand. By chance, 2 young police officers were already at the shopping center responding to a separate shoplifting incident. When they heard the commotion, they immediately responded to the ATM corner. When the officers arrived on the scene, they made the same assumption the crowd had made. The officers immediately handcuffed the 68-year-old man and forced him to lie face down on the ground. They were described by witnesses as handling the situation with excessive aggression, particularly given the man's age and physical condition. What happened next would directly lead to the man's death. For approximately 20 minutes, the man was kept handcuffed and pinned to the ground with one of the police officers kneeling on top of him. Throughout this time, the man continued to protest his innocence. He tried to explain what had actually happened, that he was the victim, not the perpetrator. But the officers did not listen or investigate his claims. Eyewitnesses at the scene would later report that one of the officers was so aggressive in his handling of the victim that he broke the man's glasses. Witnesses also described hearing the man making sounds of distress that should have alerted the officers that something was seriously wrong. The stress of the situation, combined with the physical pressure of being forcibly restrained, caused the man's blood pressure to spike dangerously. After being held down for nearly 20 minutes, the man began vomiting and then lost consciousness entirely. His body had reached its breaking point. Despite these obvious signs of severe distress, the 25-year-old officer who had arrested him refused to remove the handcuffs or call for medical assistance. It was only when more experienced senior police officers arrived at the scene that anyone recognized the gravity of the situation. These officers immediately removed the handcuffs and called for an ambulance, but the damage had already been done. The man had suffered cardiac arrest. During the chaos and confusion of the struggle, the arrest, and the medical emergency, the woman who had started the entire incident simply walked away and vanished into the crowd. The 2 officers who had arrested the man were so focused on restraining him that they never thought to secure the alleged victim or get her statement. They didn't ask her name, they didn't get her contact information, and they didn't verify her story. By the time the more experienced officers arrived and asked where the woman was, she was long gone. Remarkably, despite the presence of numerous CCTV cameras throughout the shopping center, the woman was never captured on any footage leaving the building. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air, leading some to speculate that she must have been familiar with the store layout and knew where the camera blind spots were located. The elderly man was eventually rushed to the hospital in critical condition. The following day, February 18th, 2004, he died. In what would become one of the most shocking aspects of this case, the day after the man's death, police filed criminal charges against him. This decision would haunt his family and taint his reputation for years to come. In Japanese culture, reputation and honor are of paramount importance, and the stigma of being accused of such a crime, particularly attacking a young mother with a baby, was devastating. The victim's family was outraged. They knew the man intimately and were absolutely certain that he would never have attacked a young woman and her baby. It was completely out of character for this gentle, kind-hearted retiree who had dedicated his life to his work, his family, and helping his community. The family immediately began pleading with police to reopen the case and investigate the mysterious woman. They insisted that she must have done something to provoke or initiate the altercation, and that their loved one was innocent. Initially, the police resisted these requests. They had closed the case and were apparently satisfied with their conclusion that the man had been a criminal who died while being lawfully apprehended. Eventually, after persistent pressure from the family and perhaps some internal doubts among certain officers, police agreed to review the CCTV footage from the incident. What they discovered completely upended their understanding of the case and revealed the truth. The footage made it absolutely clear that the woman was the aggressor and the would-be thief. The elderly man was completely innocent and had been defending himself and his property from a robbery attempt. Police investigators who reviewed the footage were described as being terrified by what they saw. Not only had they contributed to the death of an innocent man, but a criminal had escaped, and they had no idea who she was or where she had gone. With the truth revealed, police launched an investigation to identify and apprehend the woman. However, they faced immediate obstacles. Despite the woman having physically touched and handled the man's wallet and bank cards during the struggle, forensic examination revealed that she had left no fingerprints whatsoever on any surface. This suggested that she may have been wearing gloves or had taken some other precaution to avoid leaving physical evidence. Police searched through all available footage from throughout the shopping center, looking for images of the woman entering or exiting the building. Strangely, despite numerous cameras covering various exits and entrances, they could find no footage of her coming or going. Investigators theorized that the woman must have been local to the area and likely knew the layout of the building and ideal exit routes. The quality of the footage itself was quite poor, which significantly hampered the investigation. In 2005, 1 full year after the incident, police made the unusual decision to release 2 still images from the surveillance footage to the public. This delay was significant and controversial. According to reports, police had initially been hesitant to release the images because they found the woman's appearance in them so disturbing and unsettling that they feared it would frighten the public and potentially damage the Juice Co. brand. They worried that if people saw these eerie images associated with the shopping center, they might be afraid to shop there. This decision to wait a full year before releasing the images to the public severely hampered the investigation. By the time the images were made public, any potential witnesses would have had difficulty remembering details from an incident that had occurred 12 months earlier. When the 2 surveillance stills were finally released, they caused an immediate sensation. The images showed a woman with an appearance that many found deeply unsettling. In the most widely circulated image, the woman's face appears almost mask-like, with features that seem unnatural. The uncanny valley quality of the woman's appearance in these images led to widespread speculation online. Many commented that she didn't look fully human, and various theories emerged suggesting she might be wearing a mask, or that the image had been manipulated in some way before its release. Either way, the case ultimately went cold. As some time went by, a civil lawsuit was filed against the Mie Prefectural Police and the officers involved, seeking damages for wrongful death and demanding accountability for the excessive force used. Initially, the police attempted to minimize their liability by offering the family a mere $125, approximately 13,000 yen, in compensation. The family rejected this offer and continued their legal fight. In May 2011, the Nagoya High Court issued a landmark ruling in the case. The court formally recognized that the police officers had used excessive force in restraining the victim, ruled that the arrest and restraint had been unlawful, acknowledged that police actions had directly contributed to the man's death, and ordered the Mie Prefectural Police to pay approximately 350,000 USD in damages to the family. Despite the court ruling and the financial compensation, one thing the family desperately wanted never materialized, that being a formal public apology from the police department. Kiliki Sari was born on December 6, 1935 in Isojoki, a small rural town in southern Ostrobothnia, Finland. She was the second youngest of 6 children, born to Aino Sari, a farm manager, and Wilhelmina. The family lived in the village of Moiki, approximately 13 kilometers north of Isojoki's town center. The family lived modest lives, operating their farm during a post-war era. The household was characterized by strict religious observance, with Kiliki's father later describing their parenting philosophy as raising children with love and discipline. The family attended services regularly at the local Protestant church, where religious faith formed the cornerstone of their daily lives. Kiliki's sister Ali described her as having a muscular build and being quite strong enough that, quote, no weak man could have done such a thing to her, as Ali later remarked to investigators. According to her mother Wilhelmina, she was shy and reserved around strangers, but became relaxed, happy, and open when among friends and family. Other accounts describe her as having a kind and pleasant character, with approximately half a dozen close friends with whom she felt comfortable. She attended primary school in her local area before advancing to grammar school in the nearby town of Kauhajoki. However, her schooling was cut short when she suffered a serious bicycle accident that resulted in significant head injuries. This head trauma would later be cited by family members as a possible explanation for unusual behaviors observed on the day of her disappearance, including her uncharacteristic need to rest in the middle of the day. Following her recovery from the accident, Kiliki needed to find employment. During the summer of 1952, she worked as a housekeeper in the village of Kokemaki. In September of the same year, she began working at a church office employed by the local Protestant parish. This position brought her into regular contact with parish priest Kauko Kanervo, a relationship that would later become the subject of intense scrutiny and speculation. It should be noted that Kiliki was intensely committed to her Christian faith. She attended services multiple times per week and participated regularly in youth events organized by the Evangelical Youth Association. Her schedule revolved almost entirely around church-related activities rather than social events, especially after her accident. Due to the long distances Kiliki had to travel, her parents permitted her to occasionally spend the night at the church office when she became too tired to ride back home. They viewed this as a perfect solution and had complete trust in the pastor. However, this trust would later be called into question when disturbing details about Kanervo's character emerged. 3 days before her disappearance, Kiliki wrote a letter to Kanervo, who had been transferred to another parish in Marikarvia 3 weeks earlier. The letter was primarily concerned with religious matters and theological questions. However, some investigators and historians have suggested that certain passages could be interpreted as containing hidden meanings or coded messages, though this interpretation remains speculative and controversial. The true nature of the girl's relationship with Kanervo would not be fully revealed until years later. During initial interrogations, Kanervo vehemently denied any inappropriate relationship with the teenager. However, in 1956, when he was convicted of sexually assaulting a girl in a nearby town where he was then serving as vicar, Kanervo was questioned again about Kiliki. During this interrogation, he finally confessed that he had engaged in sexual relations with the girl 5 or 6 times, with the last encounter occurring at the end of April 1953, approximately 3 weeks before her disappearance. This revelation fundamentally changed the understanding of Kalicki's life and raised disturbing questions about whether she was a victim of ongoing abuse by a trusted authority figure. Skip over to Sunday, May 17th, 1953. The day was wet and dismal, but the persistent rain that fell throughout the morning did little to deter Kalicki from going to church to fulfill her obligations. Once she reached her destination, the morning service proceeded as usual, and Kalicki participated in the worship alongside other members. Among those present was a young man wearing a military uniform, which would be an important detail for later. Kalicki noticed this young man during the service, and something about his behavior made her uncomfortable. After the service concluded, Kalicki began her journey through the rain back home. When she finally arrived home around 1 p.m., she was completely drenched from head to toe. Despite being totally soaked, the girl was still in a good mood, laughing with her father as she entered the door. Afterward, she said that she was tired and wanted to go to her room to rest. This caught both her parents off guard, as this was the first time Kalicki has ever expressed being tired in the middle of the day. Her mother later told investigators that she believed her daughter's unusual tiredness might have resulted from a vaccination she had received a few days earlier on May 14th. Kalicki's sister Allie, however, offered a different explanation when questioned by police. She wondered whether the tiredness might be related to lingering effects from a serious bicycle accident Kalicki had suffered some years earlier. Allie speculated that these old head injuries might occasionally cause symptoms like fatigue or headaches, particularly under certain conditions of stress or physical activity. At 5 p.m., two of Kalicki's friends, Maiju and another girl named Salmi, arrived at the Sari family home. The girls had made plans earlier in the week to attend a religious youth event that evening. These plans had been discussed on the previous Thursday, May 14th, the same day Kalicki had received her vaccination. However, when the subject of attending the event had come up on Thursday, Kalicki had seemed uncertain and uncommitted about whether she would actually go. She revealed that she had head pain that became more intense when she bent down. As a result, she didn't commit to attending the event, instead stating that she will see how she felt later on. By Sunday afternoon, Kalicki confirmed that she would attend the gathering despite how she was feeling. The event was being held by the Evangelical Youth Association at a public school building located 13 kilometers from Kalicki's home. This distance meant another substantial bike ride. At 6 p.m., she left her home on her bicycle, beginning the journey. As she prepared to leave, she realized that her mittens were still wet from the morning's rain-soaked ride to church. Rather than wear damp mittens or go without, she borrowed a pair from her sister. Additionally, she asked her sister to borrow her black and red chiffon scarf, which would become a key piece of evidence in the investigation. The plan Kalicki had arranged with her friend Maiju was to meet at the Derry Crossroads at 6:30 p.m., a major intersection on the route between their respective homes and their destination. From there, they would continue the journey together to the event. However, there was a breakdown in communication somewhere in this plan. The girls missed each other at the crossroads, each apparently arriving at slightly different times or perhaps taking slightly different routes to the meeting point. Without the ability to communicate once they were on the road, the missed connection meant they would have to continue their journey separately until they could reunite. Fortunately, both girls were heading to the same location, and they eventually met up when they both arrived at Kortinkila. Despite the initial miscommunication, they were able to attend the event together as originally planned. In later discussions with police, Maiju would share that Kalicki seemed unsettled the entire day, appearing both distracted and nervous. There were numerous other teenagers and young adults present at the event, and the night proceeded without much hindrance. When the activities ended at 10 p.m., Kalicki and Maiju did not immediately depart for home. Instead, they went into the nearby courtyard where hot drinks were being served by the son of a local farmer. It was during this time in the courtyard that Kalicki began to openly voice her feelings of anxiety. She voiced her fears to several people present, explaining that she was frightened about traveling home alone so late at night. The previous winter, she had been skiing back through the forest on her own when something, or perhaps someone, had spooked her severely. The exact nature of what frightened her was never clearly established. Whatever the cause, the fear had been intense enough that she had stopped her journey entirely, sought out the nearest house, and called her father to come collect her rather than continue home alone. She knew there was a wedding taking place somewhere in the vicinity that night, and she worried about encountering drunk, violent, or unpredictable wedding guests along the lonely forest path. Rural Finnish weddings were notorious for heavy drinking, and the celebrations often continued late into the night, with guests wandering or driving on country roads in various states of inebriation. Another friend who was present at the youth meeting named Sirka heard Kyllikki's fear and offered her a stay at her home for the night. It seemed like the perfect answer to her anxiety. However, Kyllikki refused the invitation. She explained that she needed to go home that night in order to change her clothes in preparation for work the next morning. After declining the invitation, Kyllikki said that she would simply smile and bear it. With their decision made, the two girls set off on their bikes to begin the ride home. Despite the fact that it was past 10 p.m. when they departed, it was still light outside. The route home first took the two friends past a bank building. At that time, due to renovations and repairs being conducted at the parsonage, this bank building was temporarily being used as the vicar's office, making it, in effect, part of Kyllikki's workplace. The pair then came to the edge of the forest, the point where the road began to transition from the more populated village area into the isolated woodland that covered much of the route between where they left and their homes. It was at this point that they encountered 3 teenage boys. These 3 boys jokingly pretended to prevent the girls from passing. The girls eventually managed to get past the boys and continue on their way. However, one of the 3 boys, notably wearing a military uniform, began following behind them. This boy in the uniform was the same young man Kyllikki had noticed earlier that day at the church service. His behavior at church had already unsettled her, and now here he was again, following her and her friend along a darkening, isolated road. In response to being followed, the girls pedaled faster, but the recent heavy rains had left the ground waterlogged and muddy, making the cycling difficult. Maiju was pedaling so vigorously in her effort that her skirt became caught between the frame of her bicycle and the rear wheel, effectively immobilizing the bicycle and forcing both girls to stop. The boy in uniform caught up with them during the stop and asked them what the problem was. Once Maiju's skirt was finally freed from the bicycle chain, the 2 girls immediately continued on their way without further conversation with the boy. At this point, the boy did not try to follow them again or continue pursuing them. Instead, he simply stood there and stared as the 2 girls disappeared into the distance. This boy became a person of interest in the investigation, though apparently his identity was established and he was ruled out as a suspect through alibi verification and other means. Eventually, the 2 girls reached the crossroads where they had missed each other earlier that evening. From this point forward, Kyllikki would face approximately 6 kilometers of solo cycling through increasingly isolated terrain to reach her home. Before setting off, Kyllikki said the following to her friend: "I'm sure I'll be fine from here on as I've been before, bye then Maiju." After separating, Kyllikki was seen one last time by a 46-year-old witness named Jacko around 10:40 p.m. approximately 1.5 kilometers from her home. He did not speak to the young woman as he was in a hurry to get home quickly because his wife was sick and he wanted to return to care for her. He also mentioned that Kyllikki was moving pretty quickly despite riding slightly uphill. Furthermore, Jacko shared that he did not notice any suspicious activity occurring around him except for a rental car driven by a 42-year-old man heading in the same direction as Kyllikki. But this driver was later ruled out of any involvement in the case. What happened to Kyllikki in that final stretch remains partially unclear. Based on the location where Jacko saw her and the spot where her body would eventually be found, along with witness testimony about hearing a scream, a general timeline and sequence of events can be established. A local resident named Hilma, who lived near the presumed attack site, provided testimony about what she heard that night. According to her statement to police, at 12:30 a.m. on May 18th, approximately 2 hours after Jacko had seen Kyllikki, Hilma went outside for a routine checkup on her cows. While outside, she heard a voice shout what sounded like, "For God's sake, come and help." Hilma stated definitively that the voice was not a man's voice, but she could not determine with certainty whether it was a woman's voice or a child's voice. The following morning, Kalicki's family awoke to discover that her bed had not been slept in. However, this discovery did not immediately trigger panic or a missing person report. Her parents stated that they were a little worried by this, but they did not immediately assume the worst. Instead, they assumed that Kalicki had stayed overnight with a friend and had then gone directly to work at the church office. When Kalicki did not return home later that day, the family's concern grew considerably. However, even then, they still hesitated to contact authorities. It was not until 8 p.m. on Tuesday, May 19th, more than 48 hours after Kalicki was last seen alive, that her parents finally took action. They phoned the local priest to ask whether their daughter had been at work, to which the priest shared that their daughter had not been seen at work for the past 2 days. Only after receiving this confirmation did the family contact the police, and Kalicki was officially reported missing. By the time authorities were alerted, any physical evidence at the attack site had potentially been disturbed by weather, animals, or other travelers. The trail had effectively gone cold. By Wednesday morning, May 20th, approximately 30 volunteers from the local community had begun searching the road between the various towns, focusing particularly on the stretch between the Sari family home and the crossroads where the girls went their separate ways. The following day, the search expanded dramatically as more than 500 additional volunteers joined the effort. The news of the missing girl had spread throughout the region, and people from the surrounding areas came to help look for her. By Saturday, May 23rd, the search had extended to include nearby fields, moving beyond just the road and its immediate vicinity. Despite the efforts, the initial searches yielded no results. After more than 2 months of fruitless searching, a breakthrough came on July 22nd. 2 local residents were picking cloudberries in the woods when they came across a bicycle partially submerged in a swampy area in the Lelunsuo area. The bicycle was identified as belonging to Kalicki. However, several aspects of its condition puzzled investigators. Despite having been outdoors for approximately 2 months, the bicycle appeared to be in relatively good condition. Interestingly, the air had been deliberately let out of both tires by removing the valve stems. The handlebar had also been twisted so that it was parallel to the frame rather than perpendicular, a modification that would make the bicycle easier to carry or conceal. Then, after about 3 more months, one of Kalicki's shoes was discovered wrapped in her sister's black and red scarf. Most intriguingly, also bundled with these items was a man's sock, all 3 items tied together with black woolen thread. Close examination of the scarf revealed teeth marks embedded in the fabric, strongly suggesting it had been used as a gag to silence Kalicki during her ordeal. These items appear to have been placed at their discovery location relatively recently, not at the time of the murder. Just as with the bicycle, searchers had combed this area multiple times during the summer without finding these objects, suggesting that they were brought to the site afterward. The day after the shoe and scarf were found, a member of the search party made another disturbing discovery. While searching through the bog area, he noticed a dry, sharpened branch protruding from the swamp. The stick appeared deliberately placed, standing upright from the ground in a way that seemed unnatural. When the searcher pulled on the stick, it came loose, and an overwhelming stench emerged from the hole. The stick had been marking the location of Kalicki's grave. Her partially decomposed remains lay in a shallow bog grave about 50 centimeters deep. The discovery location was only 200 meters from the road where Kalicki was last seen. It was also only 50 meters from a ditch digging site where 2 local men who would become prime suspects had been working on a drainage project. The overall construction of the grave led investigators to conclude that the perpetrator likely had experience in excavation work, military engineering, or professional grave digging. The grave was too well made to be the panicked work of an inexperienced killer. By October 11th, 1953, Kalicki's body was transported to an operating room for examination. Her left cheekbone was fractured, and there were other significant facial injuries. Based on the visible trauma, it was concluded that the cause of death was likely blunt force trauma to the head and face. It could not definitively be determined whether assault had occurred due to the condition of the remains, though the positioning of the body and the absence of lower clothing suggested a possible motive. Significantly, the autopsy confirmed that Kalicky had not been pregnant at the time of her death, dispelling one of the early rumors that had circulated through the community. Further examination and laboratory tests revealed the internal organs showed evidence of wounds consistent with a bladed weapon, specifically stab wounds that appeared to have been made with a traditional Finnish utility knife. Decades later, when previously classified or suppressed case files were made more widely available, additional information about the cause of death emerged. Armas Pajuluoma, who had assisted with the autopsy, later told journalist Enska Kallio details that had been intentionally withheld from public knowledge in 1953. According to Armas, the actual cause of death was suffocation. He also confirmed to Kallio that the girl had been raped before her death. For a period of time, investigators showed interest in some glass fragments that were found on the road near the location where Kalicky likely encountered her attacker. These fragments were initially thought to be from a broken headlight, leading to speculation that Kalicky might have been struck by a vehicle. However, subsequent investigation revealed complications with this theory. The milkmen Oskari and Vilho Forsby, who drove past the area on the morning of May 18th, reported seeing broken glass, but they specifically stated it was from a broken lemonade bottle and was located in the ditch beside the road, not on the road surface itself. Later, a different report emerged about glass on the road that might have been from a car headlight, but no motorist ever came forward to report an accident or collision in that location. Investigators eventually theorized that the glass might have been a deliberate plant, a staged element designed to make authorities believe Kalicky had been the victim of a hit-and-run accident. Another witness, an anonymous car driver, reported seeing two women's shoes on Pantane Road around the time of the disappearance. This driver also claimed to see two men either cycling or walking on the same road. Approximately 10 minutes later, a second car driver passed through the same area and reported finding no shoes on the road. This gap of roughly 10 minutes raised several possibilities. First, the shoes had been collected by someone, possibly the men seen by the first driver, or second, the shoes belonged to Kalicky and were removed by her attacker. It's also possible that the entire situation was just misreported. Kalicky's father later mentioned this shoe sighting in interviews, suggesting the family found it significant. In the early 1990s, decades after the murder, a man named Paavo Granholm came forward with a memory from the time period shortly after the incident. Granholm reported that his group had encountered a frightened-looking man riding a women's bicycle on Pantane Road. What struck Granholm as particularly suspicious was that when the cyclist saw the group, he deliberately turned his face away to avoid being identified. This sighting was never properly investigated at the time, and by the 1990s, it was too late to pursue this lead effectively. However, it suggested the possibility that the killer had used Kalicky's bicycle to transport himself away from the crime scene before later disposing of it in the swamp. One of the primary suspects was a man named Vittori Lemusviita. At the time of the crime, Vittori was a 38-year-old local man who lived within 1 to 2 kilometers of both the crime scene and Kalicky's home. He worked various odd jobs, primarily ditch digging and manual labor, which kept him physically strong and gave him extensive knowledge of the local terrain. He fit the criminal profile created by investigators remarkably well. The profile described the killer as likely being a loner, over 30 years old, probably local to the area, displaying unusual or strange behavior. In the 1940s, he had been convicted of a crime. Additionally, he had been known to engage in voyeuristic behavior, specifically peeping at women through sauna windows. During World War II, Vittori had served in the Winter War against the Soviet Union, during which he suffered psychological trauma. According to later evaluations, during the conflict, Vittori lost control in a rage and shot himself in the leg. This incident suggested severe emotional instability even during his military service. After the war, he developed significant mental health problems and was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and PTSD. The most damning circumstantial evidence against Vittori was his intimate connection to the crime scene itself. He and his brother-in-law shared a common working field located just 50 meters from where Kalicky's body was buried. They were actively engaged in a ditch digging project in this exact area. He knew knew every meter of the terrain, understood the bog's characteristics, and would have known exactly where and how to hide a body in that landscape. He also would have had ready access to tools and the opportunity to visit the gravesite repeatedly without arousing suspicion. According to witnesses, he was heard making statements suggesting he had knowledge of the girl's fate. Most notably, when questioned by police, Vittori allegedly stated that she is no longer alive, and that, quote, her body will never be found. These statements were made weeks before the body was actually discovered. Later, he retracted these statements, claiming he had been misunderstood or that his words had been misinterpreted due to his confused mental state. Given his documented mental health issues, this was plausible, but the statements remained deeply suspicious. On multiple occasions, he came close to confessing. Commissioner Axel Skogman, one of the lead investigators, conducted an intensive interrogation during which Vittori appeared to be on the verge of admitting his involvement. Axel later reportedly said it was by a hair's breadth that Vittori did not confess. On another occasion, after surviving the interrogation, Vittori contacted one of the local police officers, stating that he wanted to confess something. When the meeting was arranged, however, he again withdrew and refused to speak. Down the line, several of his family members provided an alibi, but this was obviously problematic as his relatives wanted to protect Vittori. Additionally, during the investigation, he was also accused by others of young women in the area, but ultimately, he was never formally charged with any crimes related to Kyllikki. As for the previously mentioned priest who had a sexual relationship with the girl, he also was never formally charged with any crimes. The relationship almost certainly constituted abuse, but Canervo spun it in a way where it seemed consensual. He provided an alibi that changed significantly over time. Initially, he claimed that he had been at a church event in Marikarvia and had spent the late night hours in the parsonage. However, when Canervo was questioned again in 1956, following his conviction for assaulting another girl, his story changed dramatically. He now claimed that he had actually been in bed with his 24-year-old maid for the entire night. The maid corroborated this new version of events, though investigators noted that she appeared nervous and uncomfortable during questioning. In the end, despite having several compelling suspects, they could not be determined to be responsible for the death of Kyllikki with 100% certainty. And under Finnish law, homicide cases never expire, meaning the case technically remains open even after 7 decades.